Why do you write about disabled characters? How can you create characters with personality different from your own? How do you subtly work in the backstory of new characters? And will there be more with Amaranth and Sicarius? These are some of the questions you have given me that I am going to answer today in this character-focused Q&A author life session, as I'm calling these stories. So I hope they will be interesting to you. As always, I'm including the timestamps so you can just kind of look below if you want to jump around to the questions you're more interested in than others. So I will start right out with a question I get from a lot of my readers, since the Emperor's Edge series is my first and oldest series that I've written, and Amaranth and Sicarius are the first characters that caught on with readers. And so Joe asks, with a deep breath at the risk of being blocked, don't worry, Joe, I don't even know how to block people on Facebook. I don't have those kind of skills. But her question is, I am proper curious as to what Amaranth's gang are up to now, and I asked years ago. And then I had another question asking about Sicarius specifically, and then together what they're up to. So I don't know, it's been about 5 years now since I published the last in the Emperor's Edge series. And for a long time I thought, well, I'm probably not going to publish anymore. I actually wrote one more after Republic, sort of a side story with one of the characters, minor characters, Basilard. And that was, I still need to go back and write a sequel to that, but it was kind of a failed experiment, I would say. I know some people read it and I appreciate it if you did. But I found out, Amaranth and Sicarius were the main characters of the series and seem to be the ones people really want to see more of. And like I said, until recently, I wasn't thinking of doing any more, but I don't know. I saw Brandon Sanderson do his Kickstarter for his 10th anniversary edition of one of his books. And I'm not him, obviously. I'm not going to make millions of dollars from a Kickstarter. But I kind of thought, well, maybe that would be a fun thing to do, like an anniversary, like a really cool hardback, since almost everything I do is an ebook, and the paperbacks, they're okay. They come later. But and then couple that with like a new novel featuring those characters. So that is something in mind. I think I've mentioned it a couple of times on Facebook as something as I'm looking into it. I am going to start a new series in 2021 first, but I'm definitely thinking of that. I also have some other series I need to go back and write more in. So something to look forward to, hopefully, if you like those characters. All right, so the first kind of more writer-focused question is from Nate, who asks, how do you create a character with a personality that is different from yours instead of making them do what you would do in their situation? And he has a second part to his question, but let me answer that first. So the main thing with in almost all situations, I would be hiding because I don't have any of the skills that I get to give my characters, and I don't have any reason. I mean, I would like to save the world, but it doesn't seem as easy as it is in fiction for some reason. So personality-wise, I will say that my humor comes up a lot in pretty much every series. Like, it would be pretty boring if I didn't get to share my humor, and that's kind of a key part of my, I guess, my brand, if you want to call it that. So I don't try to change that part necessarily. But as far as creating unique personalities, sometimes it's just taking a snippet from a person I've met in passing, or maybe an actor on TV. I think I talked about this in another one of my Q&As. And, just thinking, how would a character having this flaw or trait or whatever it is, or this special motivation that drives them, what kind of personality might that help instill in them? And what kind of, if they came from a certain background, maybe they'd be like really jaded versus somebody that had like a really happy upbringing, might be a little more, I don't know. You can be pretty cynical too if you had a good upbringing, but just thinking of the different outlooks in life. There's so many different people in the world. So I try not to copy anyone close to me, but like I said, if someone you just meet one day at an event and they've got some interesting quirk or something that, they're doing that's interesting, or a career that sounds really cool, that's the kind of thing you can sort of incorporate into a new character that you're making. And gradually kind of the pieces come together to create an original feeling human being or alien or animal, whatever you're writing. And the second part of Nate's question was, how do you add the character's backstory into the writing without distracting from the story too much? I was really impressed with the characters in Star Kingdom and the depth they had. Thank you for that, Nate. I'm glad that you enjoyed them. And backstory is a tough thing, especially in fantasy and science fiction, where you're creating this whole new world and you kind of have to establish the rules, and there's different countries and religions. And then if you're adding in, how the character came to be in this particular situation at age 33 when he goes on the quest, that can really slow down the opening of a story. So I try to go really light on backstory, all kinds of it. Usually you find that, like in your character sheet, when you're designing your characters and your setting and everything, you might find that you put a whole bunch of information in that. But then you may only need like 10% of that actually on the page to give the reader an idea of the character. And, people tend to intuit more than you think they will. They don't need things spelled out, especially in the beginning. Like in the beginning, the most important thing is to get the reader into the story and kind of, whether you're starting with action, if it's an action adventure, or if it's a mystery, you're starting right off with a mystery or something that really intrigues them and pulls them in. You want that to be pretty fast paced and things going on pretty quickly without, big paragraphs of that kind of thing. And actually, the less you give them early on, the more it kind of creates a mystery around the character. Like we start to want to know, why is the character this way? Especially like side characters too, where maybe they're not the POV, so you're not in their head. And so that becomes another thing that draws the reader in. I've especially done this with characters that are sort of, they may be an antagonist or they may be the love interest, and we don't get to get in their head. So you're just asking the same questions that the protagonist is asking all along. And that becomes one of the things that makes you want to continue reading. Whereas if in my Emperor's Edge series that I mentioned, if I had on page 3 said, this is everything about Sicarius, right? You'd be like, oh, that's nice. But, you're curious about him and following along and learning more as the book continues. So that's just it. Realize that you probably need less than you think you do. All right, next question. And I actually going to probably do 2 Q&A sessions like this because you guys gave me a lot of great questions over on my Facebook page. So I don't want to leave any out. I'm including most of them. So anyway, the next one is from Maggie. How do you add main characters who in our real world are considered disabled? I'm thinking of Casimir and Kim. These are from my Star Kingdom series. I love it that you do, by the way. I always think of them as laterally enabled with skills and talents so named normal people do not have. Do you think it makes them more accessible to your reading audience? So there's kind of a couple reasons for this. Any writing book or school, class or workshop you go to will say, oh, you have to give characters flaws, especially if they have other abilities, which are common in fantasy and sci-fi. It's kind of almost superhero abilities, right? If you make Superman, you have to also create their kryptonite. And so it's a little bit of that, not wanting them to be too perfect, right? Because Casimir and Kim are both super smart. They're sort of my geeky heroes that drive the story, and very capable in their fields and in a lot of the situations they end up in. But because like Casimir is prone to seizures, and that he gets worse when he's in space, as most health things do. So it's like by having that always be a potential thing, and it does come up a few times in the series where even the enemies are able to use that against him, it keeps him really from being too good. There's such a term, you may have heard it in the reading world, called a Mary Sue character, or the Marty Stew, I think is the male version, where the character is beautiful, smart, she's got 3 PhDs, all the guys are after her, and she's got a black belt too and can kick butt. So we have a character like that, and the reader usually starts to resent them because they seem too perfect, annoyingly so, and they become less believable, because even though there are actually some people like that in the world, lucky them, most of us aren't like that, and we have a hard time identifying with a character like that. Most of us have problems, so it's a lot easier for us to identify with somebody who has issues, whether they're disabled or it's just some personal issue that they're working through. And then, but we also like them to have like maybe a superpower, even if it's like hacking computers or something like that, because it's really cool. Because if we're reading along and we're in their shoes, we get to pretend that's us too. Like, how many of us really have superpowers, right? But we identify them, but we also get to like live vicariously through them. So that's one of the reasons I do it. Also because I've had health issues off and on, and I have a lot of friends who have had chronic health issues, that it not only has me have experience with those kind of people, with normal people with issues. Got a dog wandering around. Apologies if you hear clacking toenails on the floor. She likes to wait till I hit record and then start roaming around the house, as you do when you're an older dog and you need to move from bed to bed. But got a little distracted there. But So it's something I have experience with, so that's what makes me go to that for flaws. And I also have gotten really cool emails from readers who have whatever issue I give to the main character, and they're like, wow, finally somebody has created a character who's like me. And so it can be tough when you have some issue, like you're autistic or you have ADHD or something like that, and all the characters you ever see out there are not really like you, and it's harder for you to identify with them. So I just hope in creating characters like that, I can still make them someone that just these vulnerabilities make a lot of people able to identify them. But I think it's really great if you can give somebody an example that they're dealing with in real life, and here's your character who gets to have the happily ever after and overcome all the, even if they're not necessarily curing their health issues, they're able to succeed anyway. So it's a little bit what I'm familiar with and a little bit wanting to inspire people. And I do hope it makes them more accessible to my reading audience. Next question. This is a long question. Amber, I am a voracious reader, and while I love a good plot, I'm most drawn to good characters. They become friends for me. My question is, what is the most important aspect when designing a main or supporting character in your opinion? What do you think makes or breaks a believable and impactful character? So I think the most important thing when you're designing a character who's going to be like, go on your adventure with you for several books, is to make sure they have a really good motivation for doing the things that they're going to do in this story. Some people like to take just that average character who's having a normal, good life, and then they have no issues, and then they're kidnapped, or they're the prophesied child that's going to save the world, whatever it is. But those characters can be hard because their main motivation may just be like, well, I wish I could go back to my old life and survive this, which can be fine. But I feel like I'm just much more interested in reading about characters and writing about characters that are driven for some reason to do something. And then it becomes very easy to decide whether it makes sense for them to do X or Y in the story. Because sometimes when you have the character that's just along for the ride and they're not driven by some goal they really need to achieve, then it begins to feel like they're just existing to further the plot rather than being characters and people in their own right. And you also tend to get more interesting stories too when you've got strong motivations. Of course, it can be something to cure to cure some disease or save the world. It's often the case in sci-fi and fantasy. But sometimes it can just be they have this dream. I had a character in my Fallen Empire series, Beck. He's basically the security guard on the ship, but his hobby is like taking out the barbecue grill when they get to a planet and like experimenting with making different glazes and sauces and stuff. And his dream that he actually gets to achieve by the end of the series is to like have his own sauce line. So you don't have to feel that your characters, need crazy ambitious motivations like saving the world, especially with side characters. Some of them may get sucked in the story and drawn along for reasons that don't really have much to do with the main goal of the series, of the protagonist, the supporting characters, as you mentioned. And they tend to feel more realistic if they're working on something, or there's also, every character should have a motivation, something they're trying to achieve, a reason they are having the story that they're experiencing. So yeah, just giving everybody, even your side characters, writing down what it is they want and remembering, keeping in mind, how are they working towards it as the story or the series progresses. Bonus question from Amber. How many characters do you have living in your head typically? Do you think about them when you are not working? Do characters from other books intrude on your current project, or are they easy to compartmentalize? How many new to readers characters do you have waiting for their turns? So usually whichever series I'm working on, those are sort of the characters that are in my mind. And I will often be like in the shower or walking the dogs and thinking about kind of the next scenes I'm going to write. And maybe some of the banter that they're going to have will come into my mind, and I have to, especially if I'm walking, easier than in the shower, I grab my phone and take my notes app and throw in the lines because I won't remember them later. So if I come up with something like that or have an idea, I definitely pause and put it down in my notes. I will say I don't usually have characters from older series popping into my mind once I move on to something new. But I will occasionally, like right now, I'm finishing up my Death Before Dragons urban fantasy series. And like the last 6 months, I've had these characters for the epic fantasy series I'm planning to do next, kind of rearing their heads up and wanting to, you know, I finally had to go out, sit down and outline the first few chapters of the first book just so I could put them on pause for a little bit. Because I have learned, this is very typical of writers, right? This is the shiny object or, you know, squirrel, dog squirrel situation where you're hard working on one thing and you get these ideas and you want to like drop what you're working on now because that's no longer as fun, writing a later book in an existing series, as the fun new idea that's waiting for you. I have learned, you know, since I do this full time and I have to finish series, I'm trying to be much better about that now. My last few series have all completed. I did admit I have a couple I got to go back in from the earlier days and finish. So that will happen. But yeah, I just always new characters and new ideas want to pop into your head while you're working on the old thing. So I have to make myself finish it sometimes. And it's not that the thing I'm working on isn't fun. It's just, you know, new thing is always more appealing, right? That's just how it is. All right, just a couple more questions here for this episode. The next one is from Matthew. You put the Q in quirky. I grew up not so far from the cranberry bogs in Oregon, and that farmer is a hoot. He's talking about a character that was briefly in my 7th Death Before Dragons book, and asks, did you actually run across someone like that? So no, not specifically. I have been to cranberry bogs in kind of near Long Beach in Washington. And the fudge that Dimitri asks for in the beginning of that book, that fudge is awesome. It's like cranberry chocolate fudge. and you do get it from a quilt shop. I think it's in Long Beach. There's a quilt shop that is also the fudge store. At least it used to be. I haven't been there for a little while, but I've looked on the internet and yep, it still looks like it's there. But did I actually run across someone like that? Not exactly, but I've kind of been fortunate enough. I've moved several times. I was in the Army for 4 years. So it's kind of exposed me to a lot of different people. Sometimes when you kind of are in the same place and the same job and have the same friends for most of your adult life, you know, you not as exposed to as many different kinds of people as you might be if like the Army was you know, I went from growing up in the suburbs of Seattle to like being stationed in the deep South in the Army. And it was definitely just really different people than just the accents alone. I'm like, some people were so country and so Southern, which I actually gave to Willard in that series. I would be like, what did you say? Finna? What does that mean? And so not just words, but just different types of people. So yeah, I think if you can travel as a writer, it's a great thing. Just to be not just exposed to your own country, but visiting other countries and getting ideas for stories that way too. All right, last question. Just an easy, fun one from Jesse. Will there be a Shalina Arya standalone? And that is a female dragon from she is in the Heritage of Power series, who is young. She shapeshifts into a human and rides rollerblades, or whatever the equivalent was. She made some roller skates. And yeah, she was a super fun character. So I even asked at the end of that series, guys, should I like write her romance or write a story revolving around her? So yeah, it's still in my mind. That may be who I go back to when I return to that series. All right, the dog is just going crazy on the hardwood floor. So I'm gonna go ahead and end it here, guys. Thank you so much for listening to this. And I have a question for you. Who is your favorite character in movies or books? Don't have to say any one of my characters. I think people that read the comments, yeah, leave it in the comments. Who's your favorite character? So that anybody reading it can say, oh, hey, that character sounds cool. I should check out that author. Because I always love to help people find new books, you know, besides mine, of course. But I don't know, it's really fun when you find a new author. And so I always enjoy when I get a whole bunch of recommendations about, and oh, that character sounds awesome. I have to check that out. So if there's a favorite character you have, let us know. And if you would like the video and subscribe, I would definitely appreciate it. I am going to be doing a part 2 of the characters Q&A. All right, that's it from me. Have a great week. Bye-bye.